There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. So if you want to improve your leadership, the argument for today is that you need to start by looking inside. Now, I made the argument 2 days ago with a group of people that this has not been such a popular thing in the last 10 or 15 years, this look inside. But it has come back. I'm hearing it over and over and over again from leaders, this sense of understanding not just why you have power or how you make grand decisions, but understanding the set of personal principles, the set of personal values, and how you're going to do that to inspire people around you, use those to inspire people around you. Now, as coaches, we've known for decades that this was a really important factor, but this is what we want to talk about today. What does it mean to look inside at your personal values and standards? And we're going to hear some great stories from one of my favorite people. So my guest today is Willie Pietersen. He's professor of the practice of management at Columbia University's Graduate School of Business. He's the author of multiple books, but this particular one we're talking about today is Leadership, the Inside Story, Time-Tested Prescriptions for Those Who Seek to Lead. Now, just a little bit of background. Willie was raised in South Africa, received a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, started practicing law, and then decided to embark on an international business career. So over a period of 20 years, he served as CEO of multi-billion-dollar businesses such as Lever Brothers Food Division, Seagram USA, Tropicana, and Sterling Winthrop's Consumer Health Group. So we're not only going to hear Willie's perspective from the years of his career in managing all of those businesses, but we're going to hear also Willie's experience in working with today's CEOs and senior executives. So Willie, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Good to be with you.
It's good to be with you, and I'm looking forward. I love your stories always. It's great fun. So you've written other books. You clearly have a thriving consulting and teaching practice. Why this book?
Well, an interesting thing has been emerging in the work that I've been doing with companies, in particular in my interactions with senior leaders, both in the classroom and in the consulting practice that I have. And maybe you've noticed the same thing. I teach largely on the issue of strategy and leadership of change. But what I'm noticing in the discussions that are occurring, there's a greater and greater thirst for leadership effectiveness. There's a kind of an unease that I think is emerging about the quality of leadership, and that companies are not doing as well as they could. Very seldom do I hear people full of admiration for the role models around them, demonstrating effective leadership. And maybe that's just part of the human condition, that we're never quite satisfied with our current condition. But it came down to a kind of a personal question in the minds of people in my workshops and in my consulting, which says at the end of the day, sure, strategy is important, but it's an element. It doesn't have a separate independent existence. It's an integrated element of leadership effectiveness. Let's learn more about that. That is becoming my most predominant need to elevate my own leadership effectiveness and really do better than I'm doing now. But I need a structure. I need a way of thinking about this rather than just saying, well, how do I gather more power? How do I get a promotion? That's not the way to develop as a leader. So what is it truly about? How do I get to think about it productively in ways that I can develop myself as a leader and get honest feedback from others in terms of how well I'm doing? That's how it all began.
Right. I love that. I agree with you. I ask too many people to think about a leader in their organization that they admire, and I get a lot of blank faces staring back at me when I ask that question. There's usually a joke that follows it. And I also agree that strategy and strategy making is different today because people feel like I can't create a strategic plan that's going to last more than 6 months. There's this kind of constant evolution. And what I'm hearing from people is the ability to persuade, the ability to get people aligned, to get people on board with something, moving forward with some sense of engagement and inspiration seems to be what people are hungry to have more of.
Yeah.
So good. All right. So what do you think we're missing then when we're talking about developing or becoming great leaders today?
Well, first of all, let me just say, as by way of background, that I've been very lucky to have a vast learning laboratory in the career that I've had, a kind of kaleidoscope of experience and so on, that's enabled me to observe leaders across the spectrum, not-for-profit leaders, commercial leaders, national leaders, and to think about that and bringing that then again into the classroom and teaching and learning from teaching. So there's a learning laboratory back there that I feel very fortunate about. And so now to address your question, having reflected through that vast experience that I've had, and I'm now a kind of one of the older characters in the game, right, is I think people need a structure. It's very hard to think about big things without having a structure to guide your thinking. So you want to get better at something, the first order of business is to define what it is and what structure, what organizing principles we can use to advance our capabilities. And there's one for strategy, and I teach it. And what was missing in action, I felt, arising from these discussions, is where is a similar structure that is practical and useful that people can hold on to and say, that I can use to develop my own leadership, because it really sort of explains what this is all about, its fundamentals. And based on that, I've developed a model, a structure, if you like, that says that leadership at the end of the day consists of 3 domains. And you think of a Venn diagram, that these 3 domains overlap and mutually support each other. The first domain of leadership is personal leadership. The second is strategic leadership. And the third is interpersonal leadership. So just a brief word about each. Personal leadership is where it all really begins. That is based on deep self-knowledge, the development of an explicit set of principles and values, if you like, that guide our actions. First order of business always is, what are the principles we're going to apply in guiding our actions? And then those same principles need to be inspiring, transparent and inspiring to others. And therefore that needs to be based on a foundation, if you like, of ethical behavior, not just behaving with power, but with consideration of the needs of others, etc. Personal leadership is where it all begins. In many ways, I would call that permission to lead. All right, now that you've got permission to lead, let's talk about the other domains. Strategic leadership is making sure that your organization has a clear sense of direction, a winning way, and a set of shared priorities for success. You cannot lead an organization unless that's utterly clear to everybody. And the third is interpersonal leadership, and that's the simple factor of bringing out the best in others and realizing that it's not exerting power over them, but in sense enabling them to do their very best work. So leadership work happens through people. And I like to say that outstanding work happens through inspired people. And if we're not able to do that inspiration, we will get ordinary work compliance, got to do my job. We want commitment, not compliance. And if I think about, the ultimate motivation for human beings, it lies in that gap between compliance and commitment. And we want to push that needle towards commitment to a shared purpose. So that's the philosophy, if you like, that I offer people, and we work from there. Now, here's one of the things that it does for us. The first thing it does for us is to say, well, as the world is changing, and I've got to confront new challenges, let me look at this organizing structure and think productively about where I need to add more pressure. Self-reflection. Where am I perhaps falling short and add more pressure? it also helps in getting feedback. Because as opposed to going to somebody and saying, well, look, I trust your point of view, how am I doing? Like Ed Koch, the mayor of New York, used to stroll around the streets and say, how am I doing? I always thought that's the wrong question. You should say to your citizens, how are you doing? But nevertheless, let that go. You don't get good feedback from a general answer like that. It's like, how do I boil the ocean? You get much better feedback just by saying to people, look, I've got these 3 pillars, domains of leadership that I'm working on. Can you give me honest feedback? How am I doing on my personal leadership? Are my values clear? Are my principles clear? Do I show them in a transparent way and I show them consistently? Do you know what they are? Because, if you don't know what they are, others won't know either. I need to do more work there. Is my strategic leadership robust and up to standard? And the same thing on interpersonal. Now you're getting much more productive feedback.
Right. 100% agree with you. Couldn't say it better more, because if you don't understand, in my view, if you don't understand yourself, what is driving you, and that sets up where your biases are, that sets up where your blind spots are, that sets up who you're going to work well with, who you're not going to work well with, and it sets up your values. It sets up your guidelines for what you're going to do or not to do, the line you want to cross or not cross. And if that isn't clear, it's very hard for people to be inspired. And I think then what we want to know is both where are we headed, and of the 15 things we could do, actually the 50,000 things we could do, where's our priorities on this one so I know how to put my effort in. Boy, is that one needed today. And then it's that interpersonal skills that leave people inspired. All right, so Willie, how many decades have I been talking to senior leaders in various formats? Either when I'm developing a leadership program for the C-suite and I ask them what are they looking for, or just talking to individuals about someone I'm coaching within their organization, what they're looking for. And this word inspired comes up all the time. I want somebody who can stand up in front of a large group of people and leaving them genuinely inspired about a path forward. Okay, so everybody has always said that word. But what on earth does it mean you do as a leader to inspire?
It's a really big question, and it's a crucial one. I think the first thing is authenticity. You need to be yourself. People, suss out a fraud in 30 seconds. Don't pretend. Be yourself. Now, just on the question of principles, we're all imperfect. Nobody's perfect. We're going to fall short from time to time. And the secret is to know what you've fallen short of. Otherwise, you can't improve, right? So, that's the first thing I would say. Second thing I would stress here is the need for simplicity, the need for understanding that whatever you're saying to people needs to respond to their specific needs and expectations. Now, I've got this notion, and let me test it with you. Now, as we communicate with our employees, we have to recognize there are always 3 questions on their minds. Those questions never go away, but they need to be satisfied. So you need to tune in effectively. And the way I like to tune in is to say, well, there are 3 questions I need to answer when I address employees or an employee group if I want their commitment and seek their inspiration. First question is, what are we striving to achieve, and why should I care? That's the first question. Making people care is key, otherwise you're just going to get compliance, right? Second question, where does my department fit in? And what's expected of me? What do I do on Monday morning in service of this shared goal? And the third one is, how will we measure success? And what's in it for me? And what's in it for people is very seldom more money. That's a kind of a quick fix. But by tomorrow morning, we're seeking the other thing again, which is fulfillment and doing something worthwhile. So I think we need to think explicitly about answering those 3 questions. In times of change, and in today's world, that change is constant. It's full of uncertainty. Those questions are burning in people's minds, and we have to address them with honesty. Now, here's a little metaphor that I like to use. to remind people of these three questions. Imagine you're walking along the sidewalk in a city like New York, and you pass a construction site, and there are three workmen toiling away. And you say to the first one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm digging a hole." Second one, "What are you doing?" "I'm laying bricks." And the third one, "And you?" And the third one says, "I am building a cathedral." Now, the role of a leader is to describe the cathedral in vivid terms and be able to say to the person digging a hole, "You're not just digging a hole, you're building strong foundations, so this cathedral will stand for 1,000 years. You're doing important work. There's meaning in your work in service of a greater cause. You're not just laying bricks, you're building a beautiful facade, so this cathedral will be admired by people who will come thousands of miles to see it. You're doing important work. You're not just laying bricks." People are toiling away every day saying, "I'm just doing my job." No, you're not. You're making a contribution. And I say to people in functions, often in a kind of a way, I tease them and say, "How many here are in a cost center?" And a lot of hands go up. "I'm a function, I'm in a cost center." I say, please eliminate that phrase from your thinking. You're a value center, not a cost center. The idea is to create greater value in service of that cathedral, if you like. But unless, as a leader, I've described the cathedral, they will think they're a cost center. So, that's just a way of thinking about inspiration, addressing those three questions, using metaphors and examples and stories to illustrate what you mean.
Right. It strikes me that you could look at any report published in the last year or two on what younger workers are looking for, on what average workers are looking for, on what motivates people to be truly engaged and go above and beyond. And one of the hallmark factors is that sense of what are we trying to accomplish? And I don't mean we're trying to generate X money or we're trying to be number one in the marketplace. What are we building, in effect? What's going to make us great as a company? And telling that story in a way, because you could say, hey, we're building another church. We hope it will be here for 1,000 years. And that's not terribly inspiring. But I can say we are building a cathedral that will draw people for 1,000 years from miles and miles around to see, oh, okay. So I think finding language that people believe is real, is genuine to you, and makes it feel like it's a thing greater than I'm just running a spreadsheet is really, truly powerful. I think it's an antidote for some of the stress that everybody's feeling these days too.
Yeah, spot on. I'll tell you a moment that inspired me. I was doing some consulting work with a very large multinational. And in one of our workshops, we invited the CEO to come in and talk about leadership. So, of course, everybody was excited about seeing their CEO, very important person. And he started off by saying, okay, I want to know what your questions are. And I don't have a prepared speech. I'm here to respond to your questions. So tell me what's on your mind. So the first hand goes up. And the person says, and I'll call him Fred because, it's confidential. Fred, tell me, you're the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. At that time, it had been closely ranked to the number one biggest companies in the world. What does it feel like to be the head of such a large enterprise that's global and so far-flung around the world? What keeps you up at night? Tell us, what do you think about, what's your leadership role? So I thought he was going to make a speech. But he didn't. He just quietly went up to a flip chart and he drew a gearbox. And I thought, what's this about? Now, most of the people in the room were engineers, but he drew a gearbox. And then he said, let me tell you what I think about as a leader. My hands are on the large wheel in this gearbox. And my role is to make sure I turn that large wheel on just the right issues. Because every time I just turn it one notch, the smaller wheels underneath are spinning faster and faster. And those wheels are you. So I live by the right priorities. and make sure that you are spending your energy on the right things and that you understand their importance and their meaning to make this organization successful. And then he said, and you all, in your leadership role, have your hands on a large wheel that must mesh with mine. And you also have to turn that on just the right issues, otherwise your people will be spinning on all the wrong things. That's what leadership is about. It's about doing the right things, not just doing things right. Then he paused, kind of nice dramatic pause. He's speaking to engineers, and he said, what is the role of a gearbox? And then somebody said, yeah, it's to transfer power. He said, exactly. Now, I just love the way he talked about what's leadership all about. Very simple thing, this notion of a gearbox. Now, that happened maybe 8 years ago. I still interact with this company, and that is now in their folklore. It's called the parable of the gearbox. People remind themselves, in the work they have to do, about the parable of the gearbox. Now, I'll give you one other example from Hans Vestberg, who runs Verizon. He's the CEO and the chairman. I've known him for many years. He used to be head of Ericsson, and I did a lot of strategy work with Ericsson, so he's become a good friend. And we've talked, since he became head of Verizon. And the interesting thing, so I've seen him give a similar talk. Actually, I mention him in my book, so I can say it here. He's got a practice that I think really is admirable. And he often tells people about this and encourages them to do the same. He keeps 2 lists. Left-hand side are the key priorities for the enterprise. Right-hand side is his to-do list of the flood of things that has to be attended to, right? And he realizes that if he just looks at the right-hand list, he'd lose sight of where the hell the company is going. So he said, I have this practice, it's almost a Zen-like hypnotic practice. Every morning, before I start the day, I look intently at the list on the left-hand side, which is the key priorities for the enterprise. I absorb them anew. Once they're lodged in my mind, I look at the right-hand side, and I pick out those few things I'm going to do today that most strongly support the list on the left-hand side. Now, that sounds like a simple practice that a teenager can do. How many leaders do that? To remind themselves, first and foremost, my decisions have to follow a flow, a direction that takes the company somewhere. And it's not just a free-for-all of making decisions and solving problems. I love that little, practice, and again, it's memorable.
I've known other leaders who do the same, but not many who do the same. And I have told a similar story over and over and over again, because I think if you're trying to... So first off, there's way more to do than any human being can get done in any organization anywhere in the world, even in mine. I mean, it's not possible. So if you're not clear about where the effort needs to go, where you have the biggest impact on your ultimate success, then no one underneath you can be clear about it either. And you have to have some guiding way of determining what is it that I'm really focused on today and what do I want other people focused on. And that practice of saying, what is it that's most imperative for us to attend to as an organization, and sticking with it, not changing it Monday morning next week, is what helps people understand how to do that same thing in their day-to-day job. And man, are we all hungry for that?
Very much so. And everything we do is symbolic as leaders. We're role models. We might not, sometimes remember when we do something, others are absorbing what you're doing and they're learning from it. They're learning what to do. They're also learning what not to do. So just being careful about the way we go about our daily decisions and our daily interactions. I'll tell you another little story that inspired me as well, along the same lines that we're discussing now. I've worked with a company in South Africa for 20 years, family business that's, I've seen a couple of generations of people leading this business, and the current CEO, a young man, has done exceptionally well. And when I go there and speak to the people in that company, they always say, oh, we really love Ian, which is his name. And he is indeed a delightful, authentic, sincere human being. That's, he's a good friend. I've actually known him since he was a kid, working with this company. Now, I, on a visit to their headquarters, a company is called Snell & Company, visit to their headquarters, we had a meeting, and then we had to transfer to another conference room in their offices to meet another group. So we had to walk along the corridor, and I was walking with Ian, and of course people passing by as we go along. And the natural thing would be to say, hi, Mary, hi, Joe, etc., as you go along, keep moving. Ian didn't do that. Each time he came across somebody, he stopped. And he just spent about a minute and a half. Hello, Mary, how are you doing? How's your 5-year-old daughter? I know, how's school going, etc., etc. And then the next one came, and he stopped again. Candidly, I was getting a bit impatient and thinking, we're going to be late for the next meeting. Can't we just move along here? Then I thought afterwards about this. We really love Ian. This is why. He showed that he really values people. When you give your time to people, there's nothing more valuable than you can give anybody else in the world than your time, your attention, because you're showing that you value them. That was a simple thing he did. It was not contrived. Nobody said to him, hey, Ian, I've got an idea for you. It just came from within. And it just demonstrated his total authenticity and his people orientation. You're important. I value you, and I'm showing it by spending time with you, although I'm in a hurry. I'm a busy person. So are you. That stuck in my memory as well. Simple things, but important ones.
Paul Axtell is famous for saying, when somebody stops, you stop to talk to them, listen for 4 minutes. You can leave after 4 minutes, but give them your undivided attention for a couple of minutes at least. And then you say thank you and move on your way. But that says, I value you as a human being. I value your contribution here. And boy, it makes a difference. And especially when you add one piece of personal, like how are you doing? How are the kids? Or how is school starting this year? People they love it. It's such a simple thing to do. And it makes a big difference. Okay, so Willie, you said that the structure for thinking about leadership, for thinking about how we improve as leaders and get better, is a healthy dose of inward look that says, what are my principles? What are my values? What am I like? What are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses or flaws or things that I need to get better at? That heavy dose of self-awareness. And then we want to look at the strategy, the direction of where we're trying to go and what are our priorities for getting there. And then we want to look at the interpersonal so that I can make sure that people are enabled to give their best. Okay, sounds lovely to me. Let's go back to the very beginning on the personal side. How do you help people understand what their principles are or what their values are?
By writing them down. They float into our minds, and then every now and again somebody might say, what are your values? And you dig around, they're in there somewhere, right? And you fumble around and you say them. They are inside you already. Make them explicit, write them down, and you revise them over time. But that makes them real to you. Write them down is a very important thing. We have at Columbia a thing called a leadership credo that we encourage people to do. They first do a lifeline exercise to say, these are the pivotal experiences in my life. This is how it's informed who I am and what I truly care about. And then you, based on that lifeline, that's the sort of feeding stock, if you like, for considering what the values are that you live by. And unless you go through that experience of actually writing them down and making them explicit, they don't become clear enough to you. And as I've said before, we're always going to fall short. But knowing what we've fallen short of is the real magic, because that's the basis of growth, is that kind of self-awareness of where we've fallen short. So that's, for me, the simple thing. I often tell the story, and I don't mind repeating it here, of how I imbibed this initial lesson in leadership from my father, at the start of the Second World War. Actually, it wasn't at the start of it. It was already in process, 1943. My father was a very humble guy. He was a station master in the railroad system. Railroad system in those days was the big kind of new development, and there was a career path. He became a station master wearing a uniform that impressed me immensely. Now, he, in South Africa, 6,000 miles away from London, South Africa was not involved in the war. The contest was happening there in Europe and the Far East. But he looked at it and he read in the newspapers that the Allies were being pushed back by Germany. And he decided to volunteer, to sign up and enlist in and go to join the Allies in the war. I vaguely remember discussions at the dinner table with my mother saying, well, why would you want to do this? The war doesn't affect us. You were two young kids. My sister was 6 years older. And he was a very quiet, steadfast kind of person, few words. And he simply said, because it's the right thing to do. He went for his medical test, and part of the medical test was an eye test. He had a very weak eye, right eye. And the person testing his eyesight said, cover your right eye and look at the chart with your left eye, which he did. And he said, now cover your left eye. And all he did was do that and change hands. And kept looking through his good eye, just to get through the test. That's how determined he was. Anyway, off he went to the wharf. And I remember being a little confused and anxious that he was going away and putting himself in danger, and kept saying, will he come back again? And my mother would say, well, yes, we hope so, but we can't be sure. And my mother saying to her again from time to time, but why did he go to fight in the war? And then she would just repeat, because he thinks it's the right thing to do. Now he came back safely. That's the good news. At the time, of course, I didn't think this is a leadership lesson. I'm only 5, 6 years old. Subsequently, I began to realize the impact that this had on me, and was able to formulate for myself what it actually meant. And the way I've sorted that out for myself, and it's part of my own set of beliefs, is there's a real distinction between physical courage, things like skydiving and, taking risks with a helicopter skiing, whatever you like. And it's for the thrill of it to satisfy a personal need. That's physical courage. Moral courage is the determination to do the right thing, regardless of the risks and circumstances. That's a very different thing, and it's rare. I mean, we don't see it a lot around us, do we? Moral courage. I'm going to stand up for the right thing. It might make me unpopular. I might lose my power. But at the end of the day, that's the ultimate power that I have, which is standing up for the right thing. Now, the first item on my set of principles is this issue of demonstrating to myself, not to show off to others, that I'm acting with moral courage, the determination to do the right thing. I'm a great fan of philosophy, ancient philosophers, the Greeks, the Romans, Eastern sages, the so-called Enlightenment philosopher. I love reading philosophy because I think it gives us ways to think about the answers to 3 questions in life, which is question 1, what is true? Question 2 is, of all the things that are true, what's important? And the third is, what's right? And the choice between right and wrong in the extremes is dead easy. We can all do that. Our teenage kids can do it. The real wrestling is between right and right. They're both right. Which one should I do? Then we loop back to, well, what's important? And that's where we find our values. So, we'll the thing that will dictate our ultimate decision-making is the values that we live by. So I love that formulation. It helps me think through problems as well. What's true here? Truth can be elusive. I think it was Nietzsche who said there are no facts, there are only interpretations. So we need to interpret facts that are around us and say, let me discover what's true. But of all those things, what's really important? The rest is background noise. And now the third one is, what do I do? What's right? So it's another way of thinking about it, another way of making sure that when you decide what's right, it's based on your values.
So that comes back to being clear about what your values stand for. And I'm going to give you an example that is a very recent one in my mind. So a young up-and-coming leader who's super talented in so many ways. And his value is serving the client, which is noble for the organization, and making sure that as a result, the company is making money. Singularly focused on that. That is clear core to his value. What that means he does then with his peers inside the company is push them sometimes a little too aggressively, sometimes a lot too aggressively, in order to get what he wants, in order to do the thing for this client, in order to make money for the company. All right? And you can argue, I don't like that behavior, but if it's clear to him that that is truly his set of values, then I think there's an explicit statement about that, an explicit criteria about it, and a set of decisions around it, and off we go. There's some truth in there about, are we really making money for the company? That's a different story. But you can see how different sets of values can play out and can be respected. Okay? So now what's your reaction to my story there?
It's not an uncommon occurrence. It's, for me, under the heading of coercive leadership. And that's really, the way I think about leadership is it's not just about being an effective leader. It's being a leader that makes a positive difference. A positive difference. Hitler made a difference, but it's not a positive difference. And in the short term, he achieved his goals spectacularly. And then the aftermath was horrific. And I think these people who run around, just throwing their weight around, claiming that I'm acting in the interests of clients, etc., and I don't care how many people I bruise internally along the way, they are coercive. It's not my cup of tea. And I don't think that, and back to the third domain of leadership, bringing out the best in others, not mistreating them and bullying them, but bringing out the best in them. It's a team sport. It's a bit like a soccer player who's a wing and a star, and saying, I play my own game, and I don't care about the rest of you. That doesn't work in the long term. Short term may be fine, but it doesn't work in the long term. So, people can have different points of view about things like this. The hard-nosed view is we're here to make money. Really, why the bottom line is at the bottom? Because everything else is above it. You cannot manage the bottom line. That's playing with numbers. You manage the things above it that drive success. So these people who just say, I'm just going to go and make more money, they say, well, what are the drivers? And it all happens through teams. It all happens through people. And if you diminish them in some kind of way, bully them in that kind of way, that's not the kind of culture we'd like to build in our organization. That's my honest point of view.
I knew you would say that, and I don't disagree with you either, because what I think this illustrates is we're coming right back to your framework for thinking about leadership. Yes, those, we would argue, those are his values, and he would say that very clearly, and I think that's good of him to be able to articulate it. But then we go to the next level, which says, what are we trying to achieve? And it isn't just money from a client. It's something bigger than just money for a client. And you got to be thinking about that bigger story. And then you have to be saying, am I enabling people to be their best self? And the answer is no. In this case, no. So I wanted to do that story because I wanted to illustrate that, yes, you can have very different sets of values, but you got to follow the model all the way to the end to say, how do those values play out for the long run? All right. Okay, I have to ask a different question. You start your book with the story of Nelson Mandela. I think he's a remarkable leader, and I really love this story. So why? Why do you start with Nelson Mandela? What do you find so compelling about him?
I lived in South Africa. I was born in South Africa. I experienced the apartheid system firsthand. As a young person, with mental imprinting being what it is, it was the only world I knew. I had no other point of reference. It's the way the world worked. All the authority figures around me, my teachers, the newspapers, my parents, were just endorsing this is the way the world is. My parents voted for the opposing party, not for the apartheid party. I want to make that clear. But it was a kind of a little bit of an insipid opposition, candidly. So I didn't realize until later, when I became capable of thinking for myself and having the experience of living outside of South Africa as a Rhodes Scholar that you mentioned earlier on, looking from the outside in, that I began to see the realities and became really disturbed by this horrific system. Let me just explain that system in a few words. It was a system of separation. The word was apartheid, the Afrikaans word. That means separateness. You couldn't live in the same areas. You couldn't hold the same jobs. You couldn't go to the same hospitals. You couldn't marry people from a different race. You couldn't have sexual relationships with them. You had to go to separate schools. Now, when I got back from Oxford, I became a lawyer. And one of the things I did was represent clients before a race classification board. Believe this or not, but this is just an illustration of how the system worked. That when people were of dubious color, are they brown, are they white, or whatever the case, but who the hell worries about that today, but at that time, you ought to be classified. And then they had to go before this board, and I was representing them, and I witnessed these board members putting a pencil through people's hair and testing its kinkiness, and looking at the pigments of their skin and saying, this is brown or is it white, and then classifying accordingly, and breaking up families up. These kids are white, go to that school, those are brown, and those go to the other school, and saying you're not legitimately married because one of you is white and one of you is brown. I'm dissolving your marriage. Believe this or not, that was the system. Now, I'm explaining that, but it horrified me when I saw that for the first time, and that's when I resolved to leave South Africa. I just said to my wife, we cannot raise a family here, and I left. And here's why I left. So it was intolerable to live under that system. That's number one. Secondly, I had the expectation that there was absolutely no hope of a peaceful solution because of the hatred that was fermenting between the races, the whites being defensive and afraid, the blacks becoming angrier and angrier at this indignity that they were being subjected to. I thought, well, there's no good solution to this. It's going to blow up. Well, along came Mandela. He was arrested and imprisoned for life. He got a life sentence for sabotage. In the event, he was only in prison for 27 years. He didn't know that at the outset. And they released him in order to negotiate with the white population, the white leaders, on a way forward. Now, during his time in jail, obviously he felt aggrieved. He probably felt resentful. And he began to realize that this was poisoning his mind. And he then made a resolution for himself that one day, if he ever got free, he would become a leader of a peaceful transition to a multiracial democracy. I mean, in those circumstances, somebody saying that, you would just laugh. That was his goal. That was his vision. And he realized something, and this is self-leadership, that if he showed anger and resentment, that everybody else would feel the same thing. He first had to overcome that and demonstrate the need for reconciliation and forgiveness, which seemed impossible. But he had to be the role model. He did things like learn Afrikaans, which was the language of his oppressors. He spoke to his jailers in their language, with his little statement that when you speak to somebody in your own language, it goes to their brains. When you speak to them in their language, it goes to their hearts. He learned Afrikaans for that reason. Well, he was released in order to negotiate eventually because there was a lot of pressure building up. People realized it was explosive. And he negotiated with the Afrikaners in their language, in Afrikaans as well, saying, I do respect your background. I understand where you come from. I seek first to understand before being understood, if you like. He loved Gandhi's formulation, be the change you want to create. And now he had to ask the nation to do the same thing. But he did that through example. And one of the other things he did was establish the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a vehicle for people who'd been aggrieved and tortured and harmed, to hear their oppressors give evidence. And if their oppressors said, I admit I did the wrong thing, and I'm remorseful and I seek forgiveness, they would get forgiveness from the people who were aggrieved. If they denied it, they would be put on trial in the normal way, and if they're found guilty, were put in jail. This was a vehicle for the entire nation to go through a process of understanding that reconciliation required that level of understanding and forgiveness. And emerging out of that was a multiracial democracy with a wonderful set of clauses protecting human rights and so on. Now, it was unprecedented, I think, if we look back in history about this. Can't find other examples of it. And you've got to say, well, there's something monumental about this. And I looked at it through the prism of the 3 domains of leadership, my little model, to help me understand where the main element of success came from. And the main element for success, really for me, came out of the personal leadership side of it. And if that hadn't been established, okay, this is what I'm going to demonstrate as forgiveness and reconciliation, day in and day out. Bill Clinton went to visit him at a certain point when he was president of South Africa, Mandela. Mandela took him to Robben Island, where he'd been imprisoned for all those years and subjected to punishment and hard labor and indignity. And Clinton was utterly awestruck and said, surely you must have felt anger and resentment at this daily treatment. And Mandela's answer was very instructive. He said, no, if I had allowed myself those feelings, I would have remained in prison, but it would have been a prison of my own making. Now, I've not come across many people with that deep sense of self-knowledge. So for me, that's the instructive part of it. Now, there were other parts. So there's the strategic leadership element, there's the interpersonal, which, we can explore. But for me, that stands out amongst all the leaders I've observed as a role model of what it really takes.
Right. And you do see that, just in simple terms, you do see that inward personal look of what am I going to do? What do I believe? What is the right way for me to live? And you see that in context of I have a vision. I have a place I want to see this country go, whether I get there or somebody else takes it. And then an enabling of the entire country to sort of go on that journey. I think it's really, truly remarkable. Okay, let's talk about trust for a minute. Mm-hmm. One of the other things, you like to advocate that there's some crucial characteristics for leaders to gain trust. All right, enlighten us, please. What are those characteristics?
Well, this is just my theory, my formulation. Others can disagree, but it all started for me when I was working with an auditing company, and they said, well, our strategy is to be a trusted advisor. And we want to pursue that and train our people accordingly. And I said, well, how do you think about trust? How are you going to train people to be a trusted advisor, not just an advisor? And they said, well, okay, I think this requires a bit of thought. Would you please have a look at that and come back with a point of view, which I did. And this is the point of view I offered. And they used this as a basis to train their people and measure success, which we always need to do. If we try and do something, how are we doing? We have to have a measurement system. So I came up with these 5 elements of trust. And the first and foremost one is I understand your need. If you're going to trust me, I have to demonstrate I understand your needs. Because if I don't understand your needs, you're never going to trust me. If I don't demonstrate that I do, through asking you, to discovering, to be able to feed back to you, this is what you really need. It's back to, you're the important person here that I'm serving. Not serving my needs, I'm serving yours. Then the second one is to demonstrate that you've got the skills to solve the problem at hand. Be honest about it. I mean, you might say, well, yeah, I understand those needs, but I really don't have, or my team doesn't have, the competencies to do what you'd like them to do. I think I can find you somebody, organization that can help you. But don't pretend you can and then let them down. So, well, I have the skills to do your job, right? Third one is, I care about your success. Back at the ranch, obviously, people are saying, are we making money out of this relationship? Well, that's, of course, a question. It's not a good relationship if you're not making a fair profit out of it. But you really have to show that you care about somebody's success, and that you'll go the extra mile to help them achieve what they want to achieve, right? So those are those three. And the next one is, I'm a truth teller. I will never, shade the truth, and sometimes it might be unpalatable. But what you can expect from me is always to tell you the truth, and not just what you'd like to hear, because that is the comforting thing for a consultant to do, to make money by telling clients what they would like to hear. And that's not a good idea. And the final one is, I keep my promises. Small promises, big promises, whatever it might be. If I say I'm going to meet you for lunch at 12:30, unless there's been some disaster or another, I'm there at 12:25. Keeping small promises creates confidence that you'll keep the big ones too. So showing that level of consistency. So I offer these 5, and on each one, let's have a measurement system. Let's be explicit about how we behave it, because it's the team that has to behave this way, not just one person. Right. Work out these teams and making them explicitly clear about it. But number one always is do the hard work of understanding a client's needs. That's not easy work, but you have to do that first.
Well, and it strikes me that applies just as much internally for a leader trying to build trust within their team or trust across teams. So understand the other's needs, be honest about whether you have the skills to solve the problem, care about the other person's success, be a truth teller, and keep your promises. Sounds like a pretty good set to me, Willie. All right. Clearly, without a doubt, we could keep talking for more hours. I know that you have many more stories because I've read them in the book. They're fabulous stories. So my guest again today is Willie Pietersen. The book is called Leadership, The Inside Story, Time-Tested Prescriptions for Those Who Seek to Lead. I like the idea that you give a framework for how to think about leadership. I know where to start, I know where to go to next, and I know what to do next. And I think you're right, that does help people really evaluate how I'm going about this enterprise of leading. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Wanda. It's been a great pleasure.
As always. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.